The Ukraine crisis, which now seems as a crisis between the collective West against the Russian Federation, has come to the fore again with the August 6, 2024 invasion of Russia's Kursk region by Ukrainian forces. This development has not only intensified the conflict on the ground, but also cast a long shadow over any potential pathways to peace in this increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has raised concerns about the talk track. His assertion that Russia is now more resolute in its stance against peace talks following Ukraine's military actions reflects a growing sentiment that any compromise would need to stem from a position of strength rather than a desire to appease external pressure. As we brainstorm the implications of the Kursk incursion, we'll also consider the role of the collective West, particularly the support received from NATO allies and key Western powers like the UK and the US. Their involvement since the launch of the Russian special military operation have raised critical questions. Are they inadvertently prolonging the conflict, or are they helping to facilitate a strategic victory for the Kiev government? Stay tuned or stay connected for more on today's edition of Global Insights. What are the geopolitical and even diplomatic effects of the Western support directed to the Kiev government patterning the contestation between the Russian Federation and Ukraine since the launch of the Russian special military operation? You're most welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's edition of your discursive and insightful TV program, Global Insight, on the Pan-African Television For You Media Africa. Today, we want to analyze the stakes of the recent incursion by Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk region, and analyzing the effect of this on the potential peace effort. With a panel of experts, we're going to understand some of the narratives, looking at the geopolitical analysis of this Kiev's Kursk incursion and the implication on the peace effort. I'm taking you straight away, of course, to the ground in the Donbass to acknowledge CHRISTELLE NÈANT, who is Deputy Editor-in-Chief for International Reporters. Hello to you, CHRISTELLE, and thanks for tuning in this day.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
It's always a pleasure, and looking forward to having a fruitful and constructive analysis pertaining the latest development in the crisis pertaining Russia and Ukraine. We also acknowledge Alexandra CHOPOV, who is a political scientist. Hello to you, sir, and thanks for honoring today's invitation.
Hello, and thanks for inviting me again. Great to be here.
Thank you for giving importance to it. Also saying welcome to Arnaud, a political consultant joining, of course, from Moscow. Hello to you, Mr. Devely, and welcome.
Hello, Clarice. Thank you for having me, and hoping to have a fruitful conversation.
Indeed, as usual, we're looking forward to us having a fruitful conversation. Let me kick off with you, Arnaud Devely. Today, we are looking at the recent incursion by Ukrainian forces into Russian territory, precisely in the Kursk region. So let's look at have a holistic analysis of the current situation in line with this incursion, which started on the 6th of August 2024, and its significance in the context of ongoing Ukrainian crisis, or can we call it a Ukrainian war?
Sure, certainly. Well, as you mentioned, on August 6th, some would say in the evening of the 5th of August 2024, the NATO-backed Ukrainian army, we know now that there were, of course, involvement of NATO countries, including the US, of course, the UK, but also Poland, bearing on operational feedback, crossed into the territory of the Russian Federation proper. Some would say, to general surprise, I would moderate this because obviously I would surmise that the Russian knew that this operation might be happening. I think they understood that technically what we understand is that the region in which the operations are going on, the Kursk region, is a flat terrain, basically just a few wooden areas, but it's a flat terrain, and in the context of the conflict as it has been waged for the past 2.5 years, we're dealing with a trench warfare, essentially. So it's an updated version of World War I, essentially, and everybody has to understand that to the extent we have now drones, buzzing around, satellite, it's, an idea that one holds onto its positions, and it's a war of attrition, essentially. And in that respect, by all accounts, coming from various experts, the Russians are winning because the rapport of forces in terms of artillery is about 10-1. So the grinding, has been essentially going on for the last 2.5 years. And the idea is for Russia to take its time and to suck the life force out of NATO, essentially. And as you mentioned, in the context of exchanges or statements made by certain key figures, at least on the NATO-backed Ukrainian side, there seemed to be a willingness to involve Russia in some kind of negotiation bearing on a conference that to this day is slated to take place sometimes in October or November. No one is really sure, but the US presidential election obviously weighs in heavily in the setting up of such a conference. We had the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba during a visit to China making similar statements. And of course, Zelensky himself came out and said it would not be making any sense for any kind of conference, the next conference after the fiasco in Switzerland, to take place without Russia. So we had this accumulation of troops and material at the border, and a lot of people started basically calling into question, the general staff of the Russian Federation. What did they know? When did they know about it? And why haven't they basically made a move to prevent this from happening? Bearing in mind again that politically and the symbolism was very strong. You are witnessing this time an incursion onto Russian Federation soil proper. But I would surmise that they either did not believe that such a foolish operation would take place, but to the extent they eventualized that it might happen, they were delighted in a way, because as I said, the idea was that, come out of your trench, you're in the open, this is going to be essentially a targeting practices. And people have made a lot of, the so-called huge portion of Russian territory is captured. We're talking about 1,000 square kilometers. Let's not forget this is about 50 times 20. So it's not a big area, and strategically it makes no sense. So now what we're seeing essentially is that through the sucking up this aspiring operation, which consisted in just deploying just mobilized personnel, which, by the way, got the exact opposite effect, because now we see a rise in mobilization from young people, which was not the case before. We're seeing a situation which sees now this operation coming to naught, essentially.
All right.
And a lot of people in Ukrainian sources are actually calling into question the worthiness of such operation, which amounts to a suicide operation.
Absolutely, Arnaud DEVELAY, which takes us to the next question directed to you, Christelle NÈANT. We know that in June of 2024, there was, a Swiss-led supposed peace conference with the aim to, see how the crisis can be put to a halt. And we saw that after the conference, the leadership of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, was very vocal, anticipating for another potential, or for a potential peace conference that will involve the Russian Federation. Now, let's try to analyze the stakes with this, invasion of the Kursk region by Ukrainian forces. How does this actually counteract the preacher potential peace conference that was, being outlined by Zelensky recently?
It's clear that this incursion into the Kursk region has put an hold on such potential peace conference or peace negotiation, or call it as you want. Dmitry Medvedev was really clear about that, and not only him, Sergei Lavrov also, and even Dmitry Peskov, the speaker of the Russian president, said for the moment it was out of question to have any negotiation with Ukraine due to the incursion into the Kursk region. Even worse, for me, it has really worsened the position of Ukraine, because the operation which was launched by Russia to counteract this incursion is an anti-terrorist operation. They have not declared the martial law. They have put that as an anti-terrorist operation, which means that now the Russian authorities are officially considering the Ukrainian soldiers which are on its soil as terrorists. And the thing is that Russia does not negotiate with terrorists, and we know that since a long time. So it's very bad for Ukraine because it has really rebuffed any possibility of really peace discussion soon. The thing is that the Chancellor of Volodymyr Zelensky, Mr. Podolyak, said that they have launched this incursion in Kursk to improve their position during the negotiations, which is completely stupid. It means that even it's a lie, or they really don't understand the Russian mentality, because it's clear that Russia will never negotiate part of its territory to cede some other part back to Ukraine. It's really clear, so there will be no negotiation with Ukraine until this incursion is not completely repelled and the Ukrainian army sent back to the Ukrainian territory, or, sorry to say that, but until the death of all the Ukrainian soldiers which are on the Russian soil. So, to me, Ukraine made everything to just sabotage any possibility of a peace discussion. Yeah. But I don't think that Kiev itself has decided. I'm quite sure that, contrary to what they pretend, the NATO countries are behind this decision, because this decision will provoke much more destruction of military equipment and much more death of Ukrainian soldiers than what would have happened if Ukraine and Russia would have already begun a peace discussion.
Okay, thank you for that, Christelle. And now coming to you, Alexander, while talking in the preamble, we highlighted the philosophy of talk trap, which even former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has highlighted that this invasion was even necessary for stakeholders in Russia to understand the rationale behind the peace talk calls coming from the international community, particularly from the collective West. With all of these latest development and present happening, Alex, how can we, contextualize the talk trap philosophy masterminded highly by the United States of America?
Yes, thank you for the question. Again, while a lot of people both in Russia and in the West are making a really huge deal out of this Kursk situation, I would agree with previous speakers that, on the ground, it doesn't really change much, except for more Ukrainians will die because it's not trench warfare, it's an open warfare, an open field. And unfortunately, there's casualties from both sides, but a lot of videos of dead or captured imprisoned Ukrainians. While at the same time, in the West, there's this jubilee about it, that, Ukraine punches back. Russia has taken 20% of Ukrainian land. Ukraine has taken 0.0002% of Russian land. So in a strategic calculus, it doesn't change anything. However, it's a slap in the face for all those peace efforts that were made, by Orban, by Trump, by China. You have Narendra Modi come into Kiev, I think tomorrow, but that was planned way ahead. Russians are joking, in 2013, they said, stop the Maidan, keep the legitimate president and keep all of your country. Ukraine overthrew a legitimate president. Russia brought Crimea back into Russian territory. So then Russia said, okay, we'll keep Crimea, you keep the rest of your country. Ukraine started a war against Donbass. Then Russia said, okay, have Donbass republics be not independent, but, sovereign inside Ukrainian territory. Yeah. Ukraine started bombing them, so Russia said, okay, now we recognize Donbass, keep the rest. Ukraine fought back, so now Russia annexed 4 Ukrainian territories. And Ukraine keeps pushing back. They keep raising the ante for some reason, not realizing that every time they do, they lose more. And it just seems, there's a saying that schizophrenia is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And that seems to be the logic in Kiev, that for some reason, this will scare Russians into submitting or surrendering or whatever. But on the other hand, like Arnaud said, there are more people volunteering to join the military now than there were previously before Kursk. Yeah. And again, like Christelle said, this is now a counter-terrorist operation. And I would just like to mention that there were another terrorist event in Africa recently where Tuareg and Al-Qaeda linked terrorists attacked Wagner Group and Malian army forces and set up an ambush and killed a lot of Malian army forces and several dozen Russian soldiers, Russian mercenaries from Wagner. Yeah. And what happened was Ukrainian spokesman for the Ukrainian intelligence agency started bragging, including to the Western news, that, we have law and arms and it was our operatives, our intelligence that helped defeat the Wagner. And he didn't think far enough to realize that these are Al-Qaeda linked people there. And since then, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have broken off relationships with Ukraine. Yeah. And again, that proved once again that there's nobody in Kiev that wants to negotiate, at least nobody who, has a say in things. Another thing that happened this week, there was an assassination attempt against the head of the services that negotiates exchange of prisoners between Russia and Ukraine. Yeah. And Ukrainian intelligence wanted to assassinate him. So again, they are trying to give Russia all the reasons to not negotiate. And they're throwing this in the face of the global South. They're throwing this in the face of China, of India, of the African countries that do seek peace and that do try to propose peaceful solutions to this, but Kiev, on multiple occasions, sponsoring terrorists in Africa, trying to assassinate Russian officials in Moscow, attacking Kursk, are showing that they don't want this war to end because, as I think the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post wrote recently of this Kursk invasion, that Zelensky's only legitimacy is the war. He's not a legitimate president. His 5-year term has run out. His only legitimacy is to continue the war. So if the war ends, he's a nobody. So he's willing to sacrifice as many tens, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, soldiers, civilians, in this meat grinder just to stay in power, just to keep stealing the Western aid. And the fact that the people in the West are still viewing this as some war for democracy, as some war of this evil aggressor against this white and shiny democratic Ukraine, that's just absurd.
All right. Thank you, Alex. And if you're talking about the others viewing this as a war for democracy, it brings us to the table the question as to why the main agreement of 2014 wasn't actually implemented that could grant, the Donbass its position. And of course, with this to you, Arnaud DEVELAY, in what ways might Ukraine's aggressive posture now alter international perceptions of its willingness to negotiate or engage in, meaningful, peaceful talks with the Russian Federation, of course, pertaining the crisis in the Donbass?
Well, to the extent that from the beginning of the special military operation, the global South at large was not necessarily in favor of, on the side of Russia, but merely be neutral. And now, as you somewhat indirectly alluded to, all this succession of events only resulted in painting a pretty clear picture that there's no desire in peace in Kiev, and that therefore, how Kiev can be, garnering support in that context, since the idea is to put an end to the bloodshed before all else. But what I would surmise is that, and a lot of people tend to forget about this, is that, it's not as much a military conflict in the sense that the Ukrainian army is a factor since the beginning of the conflict. It's really all about a media operation. This is all about trying to prop up anything the Ukrainians do, as Alexander alluded to in the Western media, into some kind of breakthrough watershed moment, which in the end results in the possibility to ask for more funds, more money. This is all about basically the U.S. arms manufacturer lining up their pockets like there's no tomorrow. And it would be interesting to actually delve into how much 1 month of expenditures results in those far as profit is concerned. And for the time being, the line remains the same. It's to the last Ukrainian, to the extent that, even if they can extend the conflict 1 month at a time, it's huge profit for the likes of Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas and Raytheon and essentially the only healthy economic sector in the U.S. So you have to understand the conflict through that particular prism.
Thank you. And of course, understanding, you quite highlighted, Arnaud DEVELAY, that it's applauded by the leadership of Ukraine to seek for more funds. And now we want to also accentuate on the statement which came from the German Chancellor while answering to some journalists pertaining the fact that the West, the collective West, even though they keep calling for an end to the crisis, they do not stop funding Ukraine with arms and making it problematic to you, Christelle. Let's look at how this is actually, the strategic or diplomatic implications of such a move where we see a collective West and even some NATO nations saying they want an end to the crisis, yet they keep funding the Ukrainian side with arms against Russia?
No, there's a real schizophrenia, let's say like this. The problem is, as you said, they continue funding and providing weapons. We saw during this Kursk incursion a lot of Western military material, a lot of Western tanks, armored vehicles, and so on. And it's clear that Kiev is not using them on the Russian territory without the agreement of the Western countries which provided them. So from my point of view, all this denegation from the Western countries that they are not involved in this incursion is pure lies. The thing is that for them, of course, it's uncomfortable because if they would admit that, they would admit that NATO is directly at war with Russia. So we all understand what it would lead to. It means nuclear annihilation. So, of course, they have to lie, to pretend that it's a decision from Kiev, that they were not consulted, and at the same time say, okay, we want the end of this crisis. But really, when you see, from a strategic point of view, this incursion is a complete nonsense. A lot of even Western analytics says that it makes no sense. It makes no sense. With the troops it sent, Ukraine cannot keep such a territory for a long time. It will not be able to go further because they have not enough men for that. Because to occupy a big territory, you need a lot of men. You have to remember when Hitler sent his troops to invade USSR, it was not 10,000 guys, it was 3 million. So here Ukraine doesn't have such a huge amount of soldiers to send, and it's losing them at a very, very high pace. It's like, when I see what situation, I have the feeling, perhaps I'm mistaken, but I have the feeling that the West has sent Ukraine to this kamikaze action to accelerate the end of this adventure, military adventure. So, because a lot of specialists and experts say that in the Kursk region, Ukraine is losing material and men at twice the pace as in other regions of the front line.
Yeah.
You imagine it's a real meat grinder. So it seems that it will accelerate the complete collapse of Ukraine. So perhaps it's the aim of the Western countries, so that after they can, throw all this pack of what is Ukraine under the bus and go to something further, like they did for Afghanistan.
And of course, bringing us to the strategic reasons, Alexander, what in your perspective actually is the strategic rationale behind the recent incursion by the Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region, to say that the reaction from the United States of America actually said they were still in talks with the Kiev government to even fully understand the rationale or the reason behind this recent and very problematic invasion of the Russian territory in the Kursk region?
Like Christelle said, there were 3 strikes against Russian bridges by HIMARS. That cannot happen without U.S. satellite intelligence. So, that's just on the table right there, that U.S. is involved, that NATO is involved. There's an American private military company, the Forward Observation Group, that is posting on Instagram pictures from within Russia, within Kursk region. But again, this is, like I said before, this is the only way Zelensky can stay in power. I was recently in Donbass. I was recently in Mariupol. We drove through a road that drones hit and burned 10 civilian cars the day we drove through. We got lucky to go through. And this is what's happening in Kursk again. The reports of ambulances being hit by Ukrainians, the reports of pregnant women killed. Ukrainians themselves posted first-person footage of just randomly shooting at houses, at civilian houses. They're posting themselves footage of them looting stores and things like that. And so again, this is an escalation, and you read Zelensky, and he's saying, you know, we invaded Russia, and Putin hasn't done anything, so that proves that there are no red lines, so let us use more U.S. weapons. And to me, this seems like Zelensky is just begging for a disproportional answer. He's begging for a nuke. He's begging for things like that, because he understands that only with escalation, he can stay in power and, again, just, you know, steal from Western funds that are coming in. And again, these are not the only escalations. I mentioned, you know, Mali. We're talking about Kursk. But
Absolutely,
2 days ago, Ukrainian parliament voted to outlaw the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine, which is the biggest church in Ukraine with the most, followers, with the most believers, the most worshippers. And now the Ukrainian government, run by Zelensky, who is of Jewish faith, but it has claimed to be an atheist, is outlawing the biggest Christian denomination in the country. Again, you know, this is probably an even bigger escalation than Kursk, because that has to have a response from Russia. Another thing that came out this week, right? CHRISTELLE mentioned Germany. But this week, there was articles that apparently, this and last week, that apparently drunk Ukrainian officers and businessmen decided to blow up the Nord Stream 2. And Germany issued warrants against Ukrainian nationals who they said were in Poland, that they say blew up the Nord Stream 2. So that's an act of state-sponsored terrorism against a NATO country. So that should immediately invoke Article 5 against Ukraine, not against Russia. And then apparently President Duda of Poland just flat out told the German chancellor that, no, we're not going to arrest them. We don't care if they blow up your infrastructure. We don't care if they destroy your economy, because the Nord Stream was what the German economy ran on, and now Germany is going into recession, and, you know, the entire German economy is going to struggle immensely because of this. And all these escalations are done in order to provoke Russia to do something more.
Absolutely.
And there are also talks that this is not the main thrust, because we've seen some Abramses and Challengers, but we have not seen a single Leopard in the Kursk invasion. We have not seen the F-16s that the Ukraine was so happy to get. So there are talks about this being a potentially, what they wanted was to capture the Kursk nuclear power plant, to then have that as a negotiating tool. But they didn't reach that. And there was a lot of people who are saying that this is just the first push. And the second push, a much bigger one, is coming potentially against the south, against the land corridor to Crimea. And again, the 24th is Ukraine's Independence Day. So that should be a day to look out for, to see, because Ukraine still has a lot of reserves that they're not using. Okay. They still have the F-16s, the Leopards, and they are going to use them somewhere within the next couple of weeks, I presume.
All right, from what you have highlighted, I would like to stay with you, Alexander. Now, when we look at the reaction from the international community since the start of the special military operation, we see that sanctions have been imposed on the Russian side. And you while talking earlier on, you said it was imperative to impose, invoke Article 5 and also call to book the Ukrainian side. What's the possibility of this, given that according to some pundit, what is happening now, countries that Russia actually defeated during the Second World War are using the Ukrainian conflict, some sort of like a revenge against Russia. What maybe analysis can we allude to this?
Well, there's the joke going around Russian internet that Napoleon invaded Russia, couldn't win, but captured Moscow and pillaged Moscow. Hitler invaded Russia. Couldn't reach Moscow, captured Kursk, pillaged Kursk, got defeated. Zelensky invaded Russia, couldn't reach Moscow, couldn't reach Kursk, and pillaged some villages on the border and, stole some groceries from local stores or something like that. Again, you see on German former generals talking about this with glee, like, oh, we're back in Kursk, yay! Again, the collective West, and we talked about this before, cannot forgive Russia for many things, including the decolonization efforts that the Soviet Union did in Africa and, you know, Latin America and Asia. We took away their colonies. We took away these tens of millions of people that they exploited. The solution to the Russian question is something that the West has been trying to attempt for centuries, you know, since Karl the 16th or the 12th, I forget, the Great Northern War. You know, you've had people like Brzezinski saying that the Russian people control way too much resources and territory. You have Madeleine Albright saying things like that. So, again, Ukraine has now become not a country, but a PMC, a private military company, in service of the West. The people running Ukraine don't care about a single Ukrainian because, again, they're illegitimate. They're not elected by anyone. Their only legitimacy is war. So they don't care about a single person in that country. They don't care about a single city, a single building. All they care about is getting money to send these poor, unfortunate souls to their death in order to weaken Russia. And, you know, how this can be solved, I'm not sure because, again, the leadership in Kiev is absolutely anti-Ukrainian and has zero interest in Ukraine or Ukrainian people surviving this. Okay. They are just the fist, the PMC for the global West, for the, you know, to defeat Russia, which will then, you know, with Russia gone, have the West be able to impose themselves back on the global South.
Okay. Of course, with that conclusion, we are going to go back to Arnaud DEVELAY. We have listened already to some of the specificities I had outlined by you and others pertaining this recent development, which have actually brought about some major stakes to be analyzed pertaining the Russia and Ukraine crisis. We want to look at the reaction from the Russian side. Arnaud DEVELAY, how can you explain the fact that this invasion in the Kursk region didn't actually provoke a stern reaction from the Russian Federation? We saw President Vladimir Putin calling this actually some sort of decrying the fact that this was an attack on humanity. So what can we, you know, allude as per Russia's mild stance pertaining this invasion on its soil?
Well, obviously, the stakes are really high. And so, as Alexander mentioned, if the idea is Kiev is to bait Moscow into overreacting, thereby playing into the warmongers in Washington to up the antes and get NATO, and we know infrastructure are being prepared for rapid deployment of NATO troops to the eastern border of the alliance, i.e. now the Russian border de facto. Moscow obviously has to tread carefully. So the authorities in Moscow have never been into hyperbolic statements. They try to remain calm. They never react immediately following any kind of events, whether it's the drones over Moscow or any kind of situation bearing on the Crimean Bridge. The idea is to continue mowing down, demilitarizing, devitalizing the Ukraine military potential. That's basically what the aim is, and in that respect, you know, Moscow intends to stay on course. To the extent NATO expands a lot of its resources in keeping this up, then it's all good strategically also for Moscow. So there's no reason to take the bait. Obviously, there's the issue of the nuclear plants, but thus far, you know, Russian specialists, at least in the Energodar plant, are trying to mitigate the effect of those kamikaze drones on the the nuclear plant there by they turned off everything at the central nuclear plant there. And as far as the Kursk nuclear plant is concerned, this so-called offensive, they're still 80 kilometers away, and they are under constant air, fire. They're just not moving. They're being mowed. CHRISTELLE mentioned it. We're talking about 1,000 men a day.
Yeah.
So the Russian armed forces are doing, an extremely efficient job, and in that sense, accelerating what they've been doing on the Donbas front line proper. So, like I said, we might hear once in a while, some incendiary tweet from Medvedev, but ultimately it's all about staying the course.
Yeah.
And mitigating and neutralizing ahead of time the deployment of any kind of system, including the F-16, which is why Poland is being very cautious, because to the extent any NATO country serves as an air base for those planes, they may themselves come to bring the ire of Moscow toward themselves, and nobody wants that. So even the F-16, I'm not too confident that they'll be able to deploy a squadron of 50 F-16. It takes a long time to train pilots. The avionics are completely reversed to what the Ukrainian pilots were used to on Soviet equipment. So to the extent they are going to deploy F-16s, they're going to have to use retired Western pilots, which is what Lindsey Graham alluded to recently. But here, again, Moscow is using all the military intelligence possible to make sure that as soon as those are on the verge of taking off, they'll be taken out immediately.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Arnaud. DEVELAY, now to you, CHRISTELLE. When this invasion happened, we had different viewpoints pertaining how the outcome will be, or the days ahead will be. And we saw some pundits actually talking of prospect of a third world war. And let's try to analyze still the reaction of the Russian Federation. Can we say Moscow, the authorities in Moscow actually understood the reason behind this invasion, and it was a decision not to, retaliate that could maybe ignite some sort of escalation that could lead to what people are already anticipating if the Russian-Ukraine crisis will serve as a premise to another world war?
Of course, leaders, the government of the Russian Federation, and especially the Russian President Vladimir Putin, they are aware, in the Russian government, they are aware that there is and there will be, again, new provocations from the Ukrainian side to push Russia, not only to an escalation, they want to push Russia to make an error. So they want to push Russia to commit like a big war crime, like destroying completely a city with a nuke or something like that, which would completely destroy the reputation of Russia on the international level. But Vladimir Putin and all his government are really aware of that. So that's why even if some people would like to see Russia reacting much more toughly, saying like that, Russia will continue to work the way it works, with a lot of restraint, with a lot of respect for the international law. But I think there will be consequences. So I think for the moment, the priority of the Russian authorities is, of course, to put an end to this incursion. So to, as I said, push back the Ukrainian soldiers to the Sumy region, or to kill all the Ukrainian soldiers who are on the Russian soil, like what happened in the Kherson region with this little area around Krinky, where hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers were killed just to keep this little few kilometers square of land under their control until the moment the last Ukrainian soldiers was killed. So I think perhaps that's what will happen in the Kursk region. So I think, yeah, Ukraine is just a pawn. So the West is using Ukraine to push Russia to make a mistake. And so that's why it's really important that the Russian leaders understand that and react in a way which is proportionate enough to counteract, but without escalating up to a point where we will go to a third world war and to the use of nuke, because of course using such weapons will open the Pandora box, which means that it will open the use from NATO country and so on. Okay. So we see clearly that the Russian authorities are aware of the situation, are aware of the real reasons which are behind this provocation. Mm-hmm. That's why Vladimir Putin called that a provocation. I mean, it's deliberate. I mean, he's always very carefully choosing his words. Yeah. So the fact that he used this terminology is really important. It means that he perfectly understood the aim. So that's also why we see Ukraine army shelling or sending kamikaze drones to the Zaporozhye nuclear plant. The aim is really to provoke Russia to a tough and I would say not a really very emotional reaction. Yeah. And Russia is making its maximum to get out of such situation, and they keep their calm. I know it's upsetting a lot of people who are supporting Russia. Yes, in the world, including in Africa. Sure. I look at the commentary on our Telegram channel, and I explain always that it's deliberate that Russia restrained itself, and that it's a good thing, because the consequences of an uncontrolled escalation would be really disastrous, not only for Russia, but for the whole world.
Absolutely, it will actually be disastrous, and even if that happens there, it won't be at the interest of humanity. And while you were talking, Christelle, I was actually reading a comment. You know, we are live actually on YouTube for you Media Africa English, and on Facebook for you Media Africa. So you can follow through, leave your comment of what you think about these present stakes regarding the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, and some of the rationale which are actually unhidden as to why this Kursk incursion could be, a trap on the Russian Federation to react violently, like Christelle just underlined earlier on. Now, in the same perspective with you, Alexa, just to capitalize on a comment coming from one of our viewers out there, actually saying that the fact that Russia hasn't reacted violently or otherwise to, the presence of NATO troops in its territory, it defines the weakness of the Russian Federation. But I would like us to analyze this from a geopolitical and even diplomatic perspective to see how maybe we can mitigate the effect of a full-blown escalation on the global world at large.
Well, I mean, what more can you want? Russian forces took New York this week. Obviously not the one that everybody thinks about, but there's a village in the Donbass that was renamed New York back in 2021, I believe, and Russian forces captured New York. What bigger escalation, what bigger, Putin going, wahaha, do you need than that? But I would argue that, the Western narratives, the Western Russophobic narratives have created this evil tyrant out of Putin, not understanding what he's about at all. And it's similar to the fact that, they created these narratives that, Russia is this backward country where, people eat, rats or hedgehogs or whatever. And now you have actually, and that was part of the propaganda in the beginning of the war back in 2022. that Russians are coming in and seeing Nutella for the first time and seeing asphalt for the first time. And these are these backwards barbarians. And, these are the same talking points that existed, when the Russians took Berlin back in the 7-Year War in the 18th century, when the Russians were approaching Paris in 1814, when the Russians were approaching Berlin in 1945. These are barbarians who are going to eat your babies. And now you have videos from Ukrainian soldiers going into Russian, very provincial towns, villages, and the roads there look better than they look in Kiev. And there were even tweets about this by, I think, in The Economist journalists that whoa, what is up with these roads? And that's the same thing about Putin, right? There's this narrative that created this evil James Bond kind of villain out of him that just snaps, pushes a button, and, down goes New York. Again, Russian forces have captured New York this week. But Putin would not have been, able to stay in power and progress this much. Again, I have a lot of issues with him, and I'm not a Putin fanboy in any way. But the fact that, for 25 years, for a quarter of a century, he's been steadily improving the Russian geopolitical position in the world is a fact. And to have him overreact because Ukraine has captured 0.00000000001% of Russian territory. Yeah. And again, according to the Russian constitution, all of Donbass and all of Zaporozhye and all of Kherson are Russian territory. Sure. So emotionally, yes, but geopolitically, geostrategically, militarily, this changes absolutely nothing, except for, as Arnaud and CHRISTELLE said, out in the open, Ukrainians are dying at the rate of 2 or 3 times as much as they are in the Donbass, where Russia is pushing, and where the city of Pokrovsk, which is the last big coal-producing center for Ukraine, is located, is going to fall within probably weeks or month, at which point Russia will deprive Ukraine of its coal production. So with all the strikes on their energy infrastructure and so on, that will be a tremendous blow. And, however unfortunate it is that Ukraine has captured, 50 or 100 villages in Kursk, that absolutely, in the strategic paradigm, changes nothing. Mm-hmm. So to expect Putin to hit a big red button for that is just something, out of James Bond movies, and gladly we'll live in a more rational and more thoughtful world. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. Just to remind our viewers that if you're just tuning in, you're on to For You Media Africa and watching at the moment Global Insight, your discursive and insightful program. And today we are on the Russian-Ukraine crisis, analyzing the recent incursion of the Kursk region by Ukrainian forces, and also looking at how this is affecting the prospect for peace negotiations, of course, on the crisis. Let's try to look at this new Nazi philosophy with you, Arnaud DEVELAY. We quite remember that, in the past days, the spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry of the Russian Federation, Maria Zakharova, came out stronger during a press conference decrying some of these neo-Nazi sentiments, which she alluded to, the collective West using in this contemporary society, showing that, the hatred that existed even before the collapse of the Soviet Union is now has been translated to the Russian Federation in today's world, and that explains why the world seems to, especially the collective West, seems to rally against Russia using the leadership of Ukraine.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I will always quote Marshal Zhukov when he said that the West would never forget Russia for having defeated the Nazi Germany. And I guess, we are just recycling these same old tropes and using somewhat the same instruments to accomplish the same old century-long, as I mentioned earlier, dream of dismantling Russia. And so you have all this kind of potpourri of Russophobia now coming out, and we heard about it in terms of the propaganda being used to characterize Russians. I think we omitted the infamous John McCain quote bearing on this nuclear power masquerading as a gas station. And I think the Western elites have self-intoxicated essentially for sure the last 25 years. And they are in denial, and it's an echo chamber. Anyone who deviates from the agreed upon script is termed a Putin apologist. And so this narrative, this self-inflicted narrative is now, as the military situation on the ground is rapidly deteriorating on behalf of this NATO operation via Ukraine, we see some interesting things. There was a few days ago a segment on the French channel LCI, which since the beginning of the STO has been chronicling, quote unquote, the conflict. And at some point in the footage, one of the Ukrainian soldiers, part of the incursion into Kursk, was wearing an helmet bearing the SS signs. And so it was interesting to see this kind of cognitive dissonance on the set, where the person who was deployed there, illegally, may I add, and journalists who are being deployed there are currently the subject of investigation by the the Federal Security Agency of Russia. And they were saying, well, it's actually kind of like, it's problematic, if it's really, those are SS signs. It's just, she used the term called malheureux, means, oh, oops, sorry, you caught us there, we hope this person somehow is being told to remove those things. But I mean, this is what we're saying now. It's almost kind of grotesque, but it underlines at which point the Western media, and again, it is a media-based war, is now somewhat, it's the snake biting its own tail. It's ridiculous. Yeah. And it shows, basically that the more things change, the more they remain the same.
Okay. Thank you so much, Arnaud DEVELAY. Coming back to you, Christelle, let's now at this moment analyze deeply the implications of the incursion or invasion on peace effort, especially as the major stakeholders are concerned from the side of the Russian Federation and the government in Kyiv with the escalation of violence following the incursion of the Kursk region. What, in your perspective, Christelle, are the immediate ramifications for possible peace talks between Ukraine and Russia?
I think clearly that this incursion in the Kursk region will push negotiations very far away. I think first, as I said, Russia will wait to solve this problem before launching any new discussion with Kiev. That's the first point. And secondly, the problem of these attacks is that it gives an argument to Russia to take much more territory of Ukraine. That what was, asked by President Putin in his speech a few weeks ago about the basis for negotiation with Ukraine. Yeah. So the basis was, okay, the 4 new regions which are now part of the Russian Federation should be left by the Ukrainian army, and then we'll begin discussions. I think the new conditions for opening of negotiations with Ukraine will now change drastically, because these attacks show that Russia does not only need a buffer zone in this area, not only need buffer zone in the Kharkov region because of all the constant shelling of the Belgorod region, because Kursk there is an incursion, but there was also attempts to enter into the Belgorod region, which were unsuccessful. So I think it means that Russia will continue to advance much more before beginning any discussion with Kiev than what would have been if the discussion would have begun now. So the position of Ukraine will be much worse after this incursion than before. So it's the more Ukraine is doing such provocations, the more Ukraine is going to a way where there will be only one end. It will be the total capitulation. And it will be very bad for Ukraine if they reach to such dead end, because, of course, the conditions of peace will not be dictated by negotiations, but by the winner.
Indeed. And in the same light with you, Alexander, while talking earlier on, we already mentioned the June and Swiss-led supposed peace conference. Let's try to analyze the two aspects now. You know, the peace conference, which was meant to chart the ways for a way forward towards finding a common ground for maybe resolving the conflict. And today we are talking about the advancement on the Russian soil. So how does this incursion now complicate the maybe previous efforts of peace which have been made, especially concerning Ukraine's NATO aspirations and even territorial claims?
Well, like I said previously, Ukraine is not an actor in this war. It's a private military company. Zelensky is not a legitimate democratic president. He is a warlord on a payroll to, by the United States, by the Lockheeds, by the Boeings, by the Northrooms. And he's getting part of the cut for the weapons he's getting, and however many Ukrainian soldiers, citizens, civilians die is absolutely of zero consequence to him. So the very concept of negotiations between Moscow and Kiev, to me, are ridiculous, because there's nobody in Kiev to negotiate with. He is just following orders. He's on a payroll, and he's following orders. So, like we've mentioned before on previous programs that I've been on, the biggest problem with the West is its hubris. Is this idea that, we are the golden billion, the end of history. We run the world. We won the Cold War. We won the universe. We won humanity. And now we're going to put our feet on the table on this planet and tell the rest of the world how to live their lives. What this war has proven, and what this war is, the bigger picture of this war, what it's been fought for, is the idea that, there are other poles in the world, a multipolar world, that there's the global south, that there's Africa, that there's Latin America, that there's China, India, the Arab world. And these actors have a stake in this planet and have a seat at the table and have the voice at the table. Mm-hmm. And that's what the West never wants to accept, because it has been used to running the world for the last 500 years. So there's the possibility of negotiations between Moscow and Kiev are just, for a short break in the war, and I don't believe that is a possibility. Yeah. There has to be bigger negotiations between, Moscow and Washington, Moscow and Brussels, and, bringing in New Delhi, bringing in Beijing, bringing in Africa, bringing in the rest of the world, mm-hmm. and, completely restructuring. We talked about this in your program on de-dollarization, yeah. on hegemony and things like that, mm-hmm. Completely restructuring the way that human geopolitical interactions work, where the West has to respect others and has to at least, view them as not some brown people or whatever, but as actual human beings who deserve the right to have their voices heard. And that is, at its core, what Russia is fighting for. It's not these territories or, this war. Ukraine is just a battle zone in this war. This war is about much bigger issues and concepts.
Sure.
And the only negotiations that are possible in this war is between the big boys. And Ukraine is not one of the big boys. Ukraine is just, the people who are doing the dying, unfortunately.
which is very pathetic at this juncture. Arnaud, DEVELAY, I will appreciate if you actually share some highlights on the question which I directed to Alexander, and of course looking at how the the world can change, or maybe in the sphere of international cooperation can have a restructuring pertaining these, getting the lessons from the Ukrainian crisis. Here we are looking at the fact that the international community is more concerned, and we see sanctions, the EU sanctioning Russia and other countries actually stifling diplomatic relations with the Russian Federation, with a spiral effect that we are already seeing, which has actually crossed across to countries of the global south. So now, how can we, in this new dispensation of the new realities of the new world, maybe see a reshaping of the international order that will, indirectly bring already a solution to some of these global conflicts, which are a setback to humanity?
Well, to be sure, we always come back to what has been somewhat of a leitmotif during our discussion is the Western hubris, and most specifically the crowd of people running foreign policy in the US these days.
Yeah.
Sure, we've talked about the arms manufacturer. It's all about the bottom line for them, but there's also an ideological component, which is embodied by the neoconservative movement. And those people believe in what they term full-spectrum dominance. They have no intent, at this point at least, unless they are somewhat restrained from within, to abandon this concept. What we're seeing in Ukraine now, since 2022, was exposed in a RAND paper in 2019, which bore on the weakening of Russia on its flanks. So extending it, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's in the former stands and the soft belly, whether it's in Syria for that matter. So far they could say that the plan is going according to what was projected and expected, and to the extent we might see a return of Donald Trump to business in January, and it's a long way from here. Yeah. We may see somewhat of a settlement of the Ukraine crisis, because again, as Alexander said, it's really all about a negotiated settlement between Washington and Moscow. But this being said, Moscow has been really clear, and they won't want anything less than completely revamping of the security architecture in Europe. So how will this be accepted and somehow compartmentalized, internalized by the Washington establishment?
Yeah.
That's a big question mark, because this would call into question a lot of the predispositions, a lot of the postulates that a lot of those foreign policy wonks in Washington have internalized again themselves for decades, literally decades. So the jury is still out on this question.
Okay, thank you. Now, Christelle, let me come back to you. We are on the aspect of implications of this invasion on the peace effort. When we talk about even the crisis in the Donbass, we cannot actually forget the population of the Donbass, and to also bring to the table the viewpoint of those still living in the Donbass during this very challenging moment. Prior to the start of the program, we were talking about today being the day of the Russian flag. I would love to have your perspective, given that you are on the field there in the Donbass, particularly I think in Donetsk, understand the viewpoint, the aspirations of citizens in the Donbass pertaining this peace prospects or efforts that concern actually their future.
Of course, people here in Donbass are waiting for peace since 10 years. It's something that is for them very important, but not at any price. People want the whole Donbass to be liberated from Ukraine, because we have to remember that in 2014, it's the whole Donbass region which voted in this referendum to get out of Ukraine and to set up the DPR and LPR, so the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic. So people are really waiting for this to get to an end, because of course after 10 years of conflict, people are really tired of this situation. People, you know, expected a lot from the Minsk agreements, the first and the second, and then little by little they understood that it would not work. There was a lot of also positive expectation when Zelensky was elected, because we have to remember he was elected on the promise to put an end quickly to the conflict in the Donbass with peaceful means, so with negotiations. And at the end, we have seen that he was worse.
I apologize for interrupting, but yeah, in his election campaign, he said he's willing to go to Donetsk and get on his knees in front of the people for peace.
Yeah. He even said he would be ready to go on his knees and he made nothing of what he promised. He made absolutely nothing, on the opposite. And so, you know, people here are not waiting anything anymore concerning, you know, peace processes or peace agreements. People are waiting only for victory of Russia, because for them it's the only way to ensure a very durable and sustainable peace for Donbass, because people have understood that all these agreements which were made with Ukraine, with the guarantee, the so-called guarantee from the West, for example, from France and Germany and the OSCE, all these institutions have lost their legitimacy. They have lost all the credibility they had also after people like Angela Merkel and François Hollande openly said that the Minsk agreements were just a way to buy time for Ukraine to rearm, to rebuild its army, and to prepare to solve the Donbass problem by military means. So now people are, of course, waiting for peace, but not at any cost. So people will not fall again for some new Minsk agreement number 3 or so on. So now people are waiting for the victory of the Russian Federation as the only sustainable way to ensure peace for the regions and the new other regions of the Russian Federation.
Absolutely, yeah. The liberated regions of Donbass of the Russian Federation. Now, Alexander, you know, here we are still looking at, you know, coming back to what you highlighted earlier on, actually saying, you know, Ukraine is just like a means that the collective West is using to get to Russia. With all of these coming back, let's take us to the 2014, the referendum, and even some of the decisions which have been unanimously taken and institutionalized. We're talking about the referendum to join the Russian Federation, and the fact that the people of the Donbass participated fully in their first, you know, presidential elections in Russia as Russians. Now, with all of this reality, which you know, some you know, part of the international community has not accepted, how can we, you know, reset the strategy or the diplomacy surrounding this very crucial element of the Ukrainian crisis and the position of the realities of the people of the Donbass in present, you know, dispensation?
Well, again, we've talked about the West being the greatest sin, you know, in most world religions is hubris, and the West is full of it now. And again, the West is completely it's calling for this rule-based system. But nobody understands what the rules are, right? Like there are laws, but what are these rules? And these rules are something that, you know, the West makes up as it goes along. And what the West, how things can move forward, and, speaking of people of Donbass, the West needs to remember its, core principles, democracy. Back in 2014, I have relatives in Donbass. I've been going there since 2014. I have a relative who's been fighting in this war since 2014. He was a Ukrainian police officer in Lugansk. He got given orders that we're leaving the city because the city is overrun by terrorists.
Yeah.
And the terrorists were, women and children, peacefully protesting. He said, no, these are my people. I'm not going anywhere. And obviously he's on the Mirotvorets, on the peacekeeper site, wanted for treason against Ukraine. And he's been fighting for his freedom, for the freedom of his people on Donbass for the last 10 years. His wife, who was born in 1992, so after Ukrainian independence, when Putin passed a law that allowed for citizens of Donetsk and Lugansk to get Russian passports back in 2019, this young woman, who again was born after the Soviet times, said that was the happiest day of her life when she got a Russian passport.
Yeah.
So, like Christelle said, these people have been suffering for the last 10 years, but these are some of the bravest people I have personally seen. And the craziest part about the people of Donbass that I always saw and found is how life positive they are, is how much joy they experience at just living life. And the second part is they have absolutely zero hatred for Ukrainians. They hate the Kiev regime. They hate Zelensky and what he's been doing to them. But there's absolutely zero hatred to the average Ukrainians. And that is, hopefully, once this victory is achieved, once a bigger peace deal is brokered between Moscow and Washington, Moscow and Brussels, the best thing that can happen to Ukrainians is for Russia to come in, because that means they will stop dying. Indeed. That means hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people will stop dying. Because I was in Mariupol on May 9th, and the city is being rebuilt. People are comparing it to Dubai. Absolutely, at record basis. And the people there are finally being able to breathe free. Unfortunately, yes, the siege of the city was horrible, and the loss of life was horrible. But again, the best thing that could happen to not Zelensky, not the Kiev regime, but to average Ukrainian citizens is for this war to end with Russia's victory. Because that means that they will start living a peaceful and a dignified life.
Definitely, Alexander. Just to note that for you, Media Africa has been on the field in the Donbass to actually appraise the stakes on the ground, and they can actually, relate to some of the aspects which you have just highlighted. Even Christelle and Arnaud, appraising the present stakes and what the population and the new phase of the Donbass under the Russian Federation. This is actually just to complement and to say, of course, that people have been talking for you, Media Africa, as doing a Russian propaganda, but the station has been across on the field to appraise situations on the ground, not just in Russia, but elsewhere, to bring forth objective information to the millions of viewers out there. And now back to you, Arnaud.
In my YouTube channel that I started back in 2015 from Donbass, from Crimea, explaining to people in English of what is going on, and that was banned recently by YouTube. People accused me of being Russian propaganda. Very few, like 10%, 90% were shocked to find out what I was saying. And if you actually look at dictionary definition of propaganda, the truth cannot be propaganda. Saying that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west is not propaganda.
Absolutely.
So again, saying facts and the truth are facts and the truth. That's not propaganda. If you don't like it, that doesn't make it propaganda.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, that's where we have the underlying factors. Now, back to you, Arnaud. What role does Western support, both military and even diplomatically, play in shaping Ukraine's present strategy and its willingness to engage in, constructive or meaningful peace talks with the Russian? What do you think are the basics, the point that should take even in the undefined time, these two parties on the negotiation table?
Well, to be sure, as was spoken about earlier, we missed a lot of opportunities going back to 2014. Mm-hmm. And now the military situation basically is the one that dictates, what the situation is going to be and what the negotiation points are going to be about. And we can expect the Russian Federation to be untractable on the issue that, sure, the four regions are subject to the Russian Federation. But, to the extent right now that the West is persisting in engaging in provocation and keeping the war effort on their side, Russia has the alternative to extend their control. Right now, a lot of people have been saying, for instance, why haven't the Russians taken over Odessa? Well, because they're trying to somehow provide some kind of negotiation angle with someone who at some point might come in Washington and be willing to sit down and resolve this issue once and for all. So this includes, obviously, and as Christelle mentioned, a completely revamped security architecture, a buffer zone, so it won't be just, the four regions, if not, like I said, to the extent that Moscow feels compelled to go and extend their drive southward and deprive this time the West from even getting some kind of negotiated access to Odessa. They might take Odessa and they may completely amputate and I would say the West, and not as much Ukraine, but Western interest, which has, they have bought a lot of the 2/3 of the land on the western side of Ukraine belongs to investment funds now. So it all depends basically on how long this is going to go on. But Russia is definitely not going to be falling back on its positions as they were back in 2014 or 2022 during the Istanbul negotiation. Mm-hmm. The situation is constantly evolving, and to the extent Russia will do what it has to do, we'll see in the next few months that it will move forward and take more and more territories from Ukraine, to the extent that there might not be anything left to negotiate over. And okay. Ukraine will be reduced to a principality of Kiev, if anything, and Poland and Hungary might decide to take their part of this defunct state. And so it's all about, the time is running out, essentially. Okay. The longer this operation goes on, the less there will be left to negotiate over.
And here we're almost culminating, Arnaud. Let me just stay with you. We already highlighted, the role of international stakeholders, and still on this issue of peace, we know even the EU officials noted some months ago that the collective West is not actually present or having stakes in the crisis in the Donbas because they love Ukraine too much, just because of their geopolitical interests they have in the area. So we want to analyze how might different international stakeholders, including the United States, the UK, the EU, and even NATO approach the issue of peace talks in light of the changing dynamics due to the incursion, and also, due to their geopolitical interests in the area.
Well, I think when we talk about the collective West, we have to differentiate between the imperial core, Washington, which calls the shots, yeah, and all its vassals, i.e. the EU. The EU has no weight whatsoever. It will do whatever Washington tells it to do. So, but to the extent they contributed a lot of funds and material and expended a lot of treasure, if not blood, because we know there were a lot of EU nationals on the battlefront. This would have to be taken into account, and obviously Moscow will remember that when the time comes to negotiate.
Yeah.
I would say that at this point it doesn't really matter to the extent Moscow has found alternative to its commerce, its trade, and politically it is now able to pivot completely to the east. And it was actually said by high-level officials, senior officials in the Russian government, that it might take about 30 years before they sit down again with Western elites, and more specifically EU elites.
Okay.
They will wait.
All right. And of course, we now look at the recommendations as we are culminating with you, Christelle. So what do you think is the take-home package as far as we continue to, to analyze and watch the stakes surrounding the Russia-Ukraine crisis? What, in your opinion, are the long-term strategies that could emerge from this crisis that either facilitate or hinder further peace negotiations? 2 minutes, please.
I think clearly the current incursion, as I said, has pushed really far away negotiations. But on a military point of view, it has accelerated the attrition strategy of the Russian Federation. So, as I said, in the Kursk region, they are destroying and, killing Ukrainian soldiers twice the rate than in other front regions. So for Russia, even if it was unexpected and not really pleasant, on the long term, this incursion will help Russia accelerate the end of the conflict, with or without negotiations, because it accelerates the rhythm of attrition of the Ukrainian troops. And we have to remember that the demilitarization of Ukraine was one of the key points of the Russian special military operation. So I think, as Abti Alaudinov, this Chechen general, said that this incursion will accelerate everything, and that we will perhaps see a very big turn of this conflict in a few months.
Okay. Thank you so much, and we end with you, Alexander. Moving forward, we still capitalize on the role of what the international community can do towards ensuring that in negotiations are constructive and not, some sort of subjective to the talk trap philosophy or ideology.
Well, like I said, Ukraine in this war is now just a battlefield. It's not one of the actors. And as I mentioned, this is a fight for a more just global system. So with the things that I mentioned, Ukraine admitting to sponsoring Al-Qaeda and killing Malian national soldiers, Ukraine banning the Russian Orthodox Church, the biggest church in the country, Ukraine invading Russian canonical, let's say, regions, right? I feel like, thanks to your program and others like it, people in the global south are learning and are understanding that there's obviously double standards to what can be done by Ukraine, by Russia, by Israel, also. And the global south is beginning to understand what this war is about, and this war will not end the negotiations between Moscow and Kiev. It will end between a big, a grand treaty, a grand deal, maybe that Donald Trump can potentially work out. Okay. But that deal will have to have the voices of the people of the global south, Africa, Latin America, China, India, and others heard. And that is, again, the bigger issue of this war. So the Kursk invasion, while unpleasant, is, a tactical mosquito bite to Russia. Okay. And like I said, this week Russians took New York, and let's see how soon we're in Paris.
Indeed, thank you so much, gentlemen and lady, for the great insight and analysis pertaining our topic for discussion this day. I want to take this opportunity to actually appreciate the technical crew for ensuring the smooth run of this program, appreciating also those who have chosen the Pan-African Television for you media to inform them not only about the happenings in Africa, but around the global world, and seeing how the present world's dynamic actually pushes nations to define their specific agenda, particularly and the site of the African continent. Thank you so much. Don't go away. I'll leave you in the company for programs on For You Media Africa. Keep having a lovely moment and see you some other time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.